Could you comment on that?
Riches to rags. Well,
he sold his dog for $40. Not because he wanted to. Because he had $26 left in his pocket and a script nobody wanted and a dog named Sugar who needed to eat. Sit with that for a second. The man who would become the most recognizable underdog in movie history was, for one freezing week in New York City, an actual underdog. No agent returning his calls. No studio believing in his face. Just a starving actor standing outside a liquor store, begging strangers for spare change, and finally handing his best friend's leash to someone else because he couldn't feed him anymore. I said this months ago, and people laughed at me.
What is healthier, to live under the illusion and still have a little glimmer of
it? I said Sylvester Stallone's real story was never the one Hollywood sells you. Here is what I am saying now, the sanitized version. The rags to riches poster version. It's missing the part that actually matters. The part where a man had to lose everything, including the one creature who loved him unconditionally, just to buy himself 3 more days of hope. This is that story. The real one. Stick with me, because by the end of this you'll understand why Stallone bought that dog back for $3,000 and put him in the movie that saved his life.
There's kinds of falls, and you have to with reckless abandon, but
why, decades later, he still couldn't talk about it without his voice cracking. But rewind even further than that apartment, because the wound didn't start in New York. It started the moment he was born. July 6, 1946, Hell's Kitchen, Manhattan, a delivery goes wrong. Forceps slip. A nerve gets severed, and baby Sylvester Stallone comes into the world with the lower left side of his face frozen paralyzed in a way that would shape his speech, his lip, his snarl for the rest of his life. Doctors told his mother the muscle damage was permanent. There would be no fixing it. His father, Frank, ran a hair salon and later a horse farm, a hard, volatile man by every account Stallone has ever given. Quick to anger, quicker to compare his son unfavorably to other boys. Picture a small child with a partially frozen face, already getting stared at by classmates, coming home to a father who offered no shelter from
determined on the pen.
The world, only more of the same judgment. By 9 years old, young Sylvester had already been expelled from more than a dozen schools. Not for being stupid teachers who knew him have said the opposite, but for being the kid who fought back. The kid other children mocked for the way he talked, the way half his mouth wouldn't move right when he smiled, and the kid who decided early that if the world was going to hit him, he'd rather hit first. Hold on to that image for a second, a boy with a broken face and a father who wouldn't soften the blow.
It's an opportunity to show that you can go back and retrace the steps.
At 9 years old, that softness gets you eaten alive. Now, fast forward 2 decades. That boy is a grown man in a freezing apartment, still getting told his face is wrong for the business he's chosen, still hearing some version of the same rejection that followed him out of a dozen schoolyards. Except now there's a wife. Now there's a dog. Now there's no father's house to retreat to. New York, 1975, picture it. A cold water apartment. Peeling paint. A space heater that barely worked. Sylvester Stallone, 29 years old, that same frozen half-face. That same slurred edge to his speech that casting directors used as an excuse, again and again, to slam the door in his face. You don't have the face for leading roles. Something's wrong with your mouth, kid. He heard it so many times that he started to believe maybe they were right. Maybe he really was just built to play the heavy. The thug, the guy who gets punched in reel 2 and never comes back. But here's the thing about broken men who refuse to stay broken, sometimes the wound becomes the weapon. Stallone had already tried everything. Adult films to pay rent, yes, that really happened, and he'll tell you himself he's not proud of it. Ushering at a movie theater. Cleaning out lion cages at the Central Park Zoo for a paycheck. He was failing at acting so completely that even failing felt like a luxury he couldn't afford anymore. And then, on March 24, 1975, he watched a fight that would change everything. Muhammad Ali versus Chuck Wepner. Wepner, a nobody club fighter, a liquor salesman from New Jersey with a face like a roadmap of every punch he'd ever taken, stepped into the ring against the greatest of all time and did the unthinkable. He survived. Round after round. He even knocked Ali down in the 9th. He lost eventually in the 15th, battered and bloodied, but he lasted. He went the distance against a god. Stallone couldn't sleep that night. He sat down at a typewriter in that same freezing apartment, and something in him cracked open. Not the calm, controlled kind of writing. The desperate kind. The kind where a man is pouring every rejection, every "you don't have the face." Every night he went to bed hungry, straight onto the page, because the page was the only thing left that hadn't rejected him yet. 3.5 days later, he had a screenplay. He called it Rocky. Here's the twist nobody talks about enough, the part that turns this from an inspirational quote card into something almost unbearable to hear. Producers loved the script. Actually, loved it.
But contempt for me for having left it, rightly so, and I have to regain his...
Robert Chartoff and Irwin Winkler wanted to buy it immediately. They offered him $125,000 for the rights alone, no strings, no role for Stallone, just take the money and disappear. In 1975 dollars, that's the kind of money that ends hunger. That's heat in the apartment. That's sugar, fed and warm and never having to be sold at all. He said no. They came back with more, $250,000. Still no acting role required, just sign here. He said no again. Understand what that no actually cost him. He had $26 to his name. His wife was pregnant. His dog was already gone, sold to a stranger outside a convenience store because there was nothing left to give him. And here was a check sitting on a table big enough to fix all of it overnight, and Stallone pushed it back across. "I wrote this for me," he told them. "If I don't play Rocky, you don't get the script." The studio thought he was insane. Maybe he was, but somewhere underneath the desperation was a conviction that no amount of hunger could talk him out of. He had written the only role his broken, snarling, misunderstood face was ever built to play, and he would rather starve than watch someone else wear it. They finally agreed. A budget of just over $1 million. Stallone would star. He'd get a fraction of what he was originally offered, reportedly around $35,000 combined for the script and the lead role. Some accounts say even less up front, but he would own the one thing that actually mattered: the dream. Now here's the detail that turns grown men into wrecks when they hear it for the first time. That dog, Sugar, sold weeks earlier for $40 just to survive. Stallone tracked down the man who bought him, begged him to sell the dog back. The man, sensing exactly how much this mangy mutt now meant to a desperate actor, refused every offer, until Stallone finally paid him $3,000, roughly 75 times what he'd sold Sugar for. And then he did something that still gives me chills. He wrote Sugar into the movie. Watch Rocky again, really watch it, and that scruffy dog trailing behind Rocky Balboa through the streets of Philadelphia, the one he talks to in his apartment like his only real friend in the world, that's not a prop. That's the actual dog Sylvester Stallone sold in desperation, bought back in triumph, and immortalized on 35mm film forever. Rocky wasn't based on Stallone's life. Rocky was Stallone's life, smuggled into a boxing movie so Hollywood would let him tell it. The film opened in 1976. It made $225 million against a budget of about $1 million. It won Best Picture. It beat Taxi Driver and network films now considered among the greatest ever made, and somehow the scrappy underdog movie about a nobody club fighter took the biggest prize in the industry. Stallone went from selling his dog on a street corner to standing on an Oscar stage in the span of 18 months. But, and this is where the story stops being a fairy tale and starts being something raw. Winning didn't fix him. It never does. Not really. Let's do a gear check here, because the next chapter of this story is the one the highlight reels always skip. Success didn't heal the wound. If anything, it exposed a new one. Stallone spent the next decade terrified of being a one-note actor. He wrote and directed sequel after sequel: Rocky 2, 3, 4, chasing bigger box office, bigger explosions, bigger muscles. By the time Rocky 4 hit theaters in 1985, Stallone was a global icon, the embodiment of 80s excess, and privately, by his own later admission, someone who felt like he'd become a cartoon of the man who wrote that first desperate screenplay. Then came the fall. Rocky V in 1990 was supposed to be a return to the gritty roots. Instead, it was widely mocked, underperformed, and devastatingly for Stallone, it felt like proof the magic was gone. Around the same era, a string of critical and commercial failures piled up. Stop. Or My Mom Will Shoot in 1992 is still, to this day, used as shorthand in film criticism for a career gone soft. He went from Best Picture winner to Punchline in the space of about 15 years. And here's the part that should make you sit up. It wasn't just professional. In 1996, Stallone poured a reported $50 to $60 million of his own money into Planet Hollywood, the celebrity-branded restaurant chain he co-owned with Bruce Willis and Arnold Schwarzenegger. He believed in it. He put his name, his face, his money behind it. Within a few years, the chain was drowning in debt and filed for bankruptcy protection, and a meaningful slice of what Stallone had clawed out of nothing was gone again. Ask yourself something honest for a second. How many times can a man rebuild before the rebuilding itself becomes the only skill he has left? Because here's the open loop. I need you to hold on to the personal tragedy that Stallone almost never speaks about publicly. The one that reframes everything you think you know about Rocky's creator. In July 2012, Stallone's oldest son, Sage Stallone, an actor and director himself, who had appeared alongside his father in Rocky V, was found dead in his Los Angeles home. He was 36 years old. The coroner's report cited coronary artery disease with hardening of the arteries as a contributing factor. Stallone, a man who had built an entire mythology around never staying down, has said almost nothing detailed publicly about that year. Those close to him have described it as the only fight in his life he couldn't script his way out of. No triumphant montage. No training sequence. Just a father burying his son in a year when the cameras were still expecting him to be indestructible. I'm not telling you this to manipulate you. I'm telling you because it's the piece of the puzzle that makes everything else make sense. Why, when Stallone finally got the chance to close the Rocky saga for good in Creed in 2015, he didn't play it as a victory lap. He played Rocky Balboa old, sick, alone, and afraid of dying, and it earned him an Oscar nomination, his first for acting, nearly 40 years after he'd first refused that $250,000 check. That's not a coincidence. That's a man finally writing his grief into the only character who ever let him tell the truth. Here's your first breathing room moment. Let that settle. A boy sold his dog for $40. He refused a fortune to protect one script. He rebuilt an empire, lost most of it, and rebuilt it again. He buried his own son and somehow still stood in front of a camera the following year. If that isn't the most Rocky Balboa thing a human being has ever lived through in real life, I genuinely don't know what is. Now let's flash forward, because the comeback here is almost as unbelievable as the original one. By the mid-2010s, most of Stallone's generation of action stars had faded into nostalgia tours. He didn't. He co-created and starred in the Expendables franchise starting in 2010, essentially inventing a new genre years before it became an industry trend. He kept writing, kept producing, kept showing up. And then, in 2022, at age 76, he did something that shocked even longtime fans. He starred in Tulsa King, playing an aging mob boss fresh out of a 25-year prison sentence, trying to rebuild an empire in a city where nobody knows his name. Watch that premise again. An older man re-entering a world that's moved on without him, forced to rebuild everything from absolute zero using nothing but reputation and grit. Stallone wasn't just acting anymore. At 76, he was still writing his own life into the script, the same way he did in that freezing apartment in 1975. Here's a scene worth picturing. A film crew on location, decades of scar tissue and surgeries behind him, the shoulder reconstructions, the neck fusion from an old stunt injury, the body of a man who has quite literally broken himself apart chasing this career, and instead of easing into retirement with a warm nostalgia special, he's on set at 76, memorizing new dialogue, learning a new character's rhythm, proving something to an industry that stopped asking him to prove anything a long time ago. Nobody made him do Tulsa King. There was no financial desperation this time, no $26 in his pocket. He did it because some part of that 9-year-old boy who got expelled for fighting back never actually stopped fighting. There's a quieter scene in this story too, one that rarely makes the highlight reels because it doesn't have an explosion or a training montage in it. Stallone married Jennifer Flavin in 1997 after a relationship that had already survived nearly a decade of the tabloid churn Hollywood puts its biggest stars through. 3 daughters followed. And by every account from people who've spent time around that household, the man who built an entire career playing indestructible men spent his evenings doing something almost nobody expected from the guy who played Rambo, showing up consistently, imperfectly, as a father trying to give his daughters something steadier than what his own father gave him. In 2022, that marriage briefly made headlines when Flavin filed for divorce, and for a few uncomfortable months the tabloids treated it like just another Hollywood ending. But by early 2023, the two had reconciled, choosing to fight for the marriage rather than let it become one more thing filed under used to be. If you're keeping score of everything this man has rebuilt in his lifetime, a career, a fortune, a body held together by surgical steel, you can add a marriage to that list too. That's the part of the mythology nobody puts on a poster. The rebuilding wasn't just professional, it was personal, every single time, in rooms with no cameras at all. So here's the question I want you to actually sit with, not just scroll past. We love calling Sylvester Stallone an underdog story, but underdog implies the fight ends. Rocky went the distance once, and the movie ended. Stallone never got that luxury. He went the distance against poverty, against an industry that mocked his face, against bankruptcy, against the death of his own child, and every single time, at every single low point, he picked the pen back up. What would you have done with $26 and a rejected script? Would you have taken the $250,000? Be honest with yourself for a second. I think most of us would have. And that's exactly why there's only one Sylvester Stallone. If this story hit you the way it hit me putting it together, do 3 things right now. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one of these. We're doing the untold stories nobody else is willing to tell properly. Drop a comment with one word, sugar, if you understood exactly why that dog's name matters more than any award he ever won. And send this to the one person in your life who needs to hear that starting over isn't failure, it's the only thing separating the people who quit from the people who become legends. Because here's the last thing I'll leave you with. Rocky Balboa never actually beats Apollo Creed in the first movie. Go back and check. He loses the fight. On points. In front of the whole world. He just refuses to stay down long enough for it to matter. That's not a boxing story. That's Sylvester Stallone's entire life, and somehow it's still not finished being written. Think about that the next time someone tells you it's too late to start over. Think about a 29-year-old man with a frozen half smile, $40 for a dog he loved, and a stubborn refusal to let anyone else write his ending for him. Somewhere out there, right now, someone is sitting in their own version of that freezing apartment, convinced the door has already closed on them. It hasn't. It never actually does not until you stop getting up.